Anyway, the next speaker is David Chenault. David is the president of Polaris Sensor Technologies, where he's leading a team of 27 scientists and engineers developing advanced sensors, algorithms, and optical instrumentation. David is going to tell us about his Pyxis camera, which is a unique camera in the thermal infrared imaging world. So, David, are you available and ready to roll?
I think so. Can you hear me okay?
I hear you fine.
And in fact, my title is particularly uninspiring, but Judd got me kind of off guard, I guess. And so I am going to provide an update on the Pyxis, but I'm also going to address applications to the sUAS piece as well. Let's see. All right, I've got to get one thing straight here. Okay, so this is a brief overview of what I'm going to talk about. I'll talk a little bit about the Pyxis camera if anybody hadn't heard anything about it, what it is and what its capabilities are. Give some examples of some airborne collects that are relevant to sUAS, well, and airborne collects. I'll talk about the Oscar system, which is unfortunately no relationship to Oscar Garcia, but it's an effort we've been teamed up with American Aerospace on. Talk about lessons learned and some of the plans we have in the future. So the Pyxis is, there's been a lot of talk about thermal cameras. Pyxis is a thermal camera modified. We start with the one that basically everybody's been using, but we modify it by adding a polarization filter. So basically think putting polarized sunglasses on a thermal camera. And the reason we do that is to enhance detail in situations where there's low thermal contrast. I'll show some examples, and I'm sure some of you have seen where the thermal contrast, basically the oil or whatever is floating on the surface of the water, is essentially the same temperature as the water. A lot of times it does get heated during the day, but there are times where there is no thermal contrast. And so what we do is we bring the polarization into it, and it provides additional information about the material. And so what we can do is collect the polarization information and the thermal simultaneously by use of this special filter. And since we can collect them simultaneously, we actually put them together in a fused image that's shown here, our eTherm, or enhanced thermal image. And basically what we do is we use the grayscale from the thermal and then paint the polarization with colors that can mean different things. In most of what I'm going to be showing you, you're basically just going to see red. Red denotes bad, which is oil in the seam. And so all of this fits within basically the size of a standard uncooled thermal camera. Fits in your hand, and we've integrated onto both rotary and fixed wing sUAS. And so some of the capabilities include, well, it's important to note that this is a day-night camera, as you would expect. The polarization doesn't change that in any way. It's a day-night camera. It works in both smooth water and waves. So basically wind speeds from 0 to, well, we haven't hit the maximum yet. And so here you can see in fact, breaking waves. And you'll see pieces of this information throughout the rest of this talk. There's a visible image, and you may recognize OMSET here. This is what the thermal image shows. And so you can see the structure of the waves, but you really can't see the oil as it shows up in the thermal image, in this case, a little bit. But in the polarization data product that we measure simultaneously with the thermal, this is what it looks like. And then this is that eTherm image that I described. So we're fusing this image with the thermal in order to maintain situational awareness. And frankly, thermal works pretty well a lot of times. So we just want to, we want to add to that capability and not take away from it. We're not dependent on sun position. We're not subject to sun glint or anything like that. We've looked at crude oil, we've looked at refined oil, we've looked at diesel, kerosene. We haven't looked at heavy fuel oils or low sulfur fuel oil, and we'd love an opportunity to get a chance to see some of those. thin and thick emulsified. We've watched the action of dispersants, and so it can help, at various points in a response. And in many cases, it rejects false alarms or false positives that you might find in other areas. So after we did some testing at Olmsted, we had a couple of opportunities to take it handheld into a helicopter. And so this was Santa Barbara. Many of you may recognize the view in the visible image. And so what you're seeing in the right is our E-therm image, where the highlighted red shows the thickest part of the seep, which is typically around 50 microns or thicker. So basically the metallic thickness. You can see a little bit of sheen there, but of course it's a good bit larger than the oil. There's some kelp forests, and there's surface wellings that creates texture on the surface that could be a false positive, and of course sun glint. So we are able to reject some of these things that might be confounding. We also had another opportunity to fly off of the Taylor Seep. And so on the left, obviously, is the visible image, and then this is the Pyxis E-therm image overlaid on top of that. So does pretty well. Again, you can visualize the sheen kind of throughout the middle of it, but again, the thermal and the E-therm highlight the thickest part of that image. So with some successful manned images, data collects, we partook on a project to put it onto a fixed wing, and we worked with AeroVironment and put it into a Puma. We got it to the point where we're able to provide real-time data downlinks, both of the visible and the thermal data products, the thermal, the polarization, and the E-therm. And then there was a fair amount of interest in making sure that we could do some post-processing, post-flight processing. And so we included the ability to collect the data, the raw data on board the system itself. And that test opportunity provided the opportunity for us to look at a handful of different things. Again, on the left is the thermal image, and you can see that there's really not extracting any kind of information out of this. For the oil, there's about a 4x8 foot pan of oil here that we're orbiting. There's also some man-made objects that you see elsewhere that just, some of them just simply do not show up. And so for some of the pipeline inspection, pipeline surveillance applications where you're looking for pooling liquids and perhaps incursion of man-made vehicles, then this would be very appropriate for those types of applications. We took on the job of integrating the Pyxis with our own drone, and actually had the opportunity to overfly a marina fire. This here in the middle used to be a pier with a bunch of actually liveaboard houseboats. And there was a marina fire that took out the pier in a large number of the boats. The response put a boom around the sunken boats. And you can see that very clearly that they did a pretty good job of containing the thickest part of the oil. There was one, though, you can obviously see the sheen back here, but the thickness turned out to be an indicator that there was actually a sunken boat back there. And so we actually contributed to the response by highlighting the location of one of the boats that they had missed to that point. However, the putting together a sensor on a drone, we decided that it might be a good thing to outsource that. And so we started working with David Yoel at American Aerospace and put together the Oscar system, oil spill cleanup and response system that is shown here. The Pyxis camera is on the right-hand side with a visible camera right next to it. This is one of their pilots standing on the beach in Delaware at the oil spill that happened back in October. So with this system, it's a single pilot system. The data is displayed on the display right here. And he can cycle through, again, the different data products, the visible, the thermal, and the e-therm imagery. And we've mapped one of the buttons so that he can automatically acquire information for a report, which includes a couple of images and this information here. As soon as you get on the ground, you get a report that looks like this right here with GPS coordinates and that kind of thing. And it's a small enough file that it's easily emailable, even with a bad connection. And so this is imagery shown from that response to the spill in Delaware. And what happened was there was a spill of about 100 gallons, and I'm not sure they ever really found out where it came from, but it ended up on the beaches. And so there was a big effort to try to detect it and monitor what was going on the beaches. And so we got there a couple of 3 days after the fact. And by the time we got there, the tar balls that were up on the beach actually were pretty small. But in deploying the Oscar system, you can see that we actually do a pretty good job of rejecting the false positives that result from the vegetation that you see in line here, as well as in the visual. There's an awful lot of small, round, dark-shaped objects, but it turns out that these are really this one right here, for example, and this one. There's one right up in there. Really does a pretty good job of highlighting those. And these were in fact ground truths. So this would suggest an application for beach surveillance or SCAT type operations, particularly when you've got a lot of beach to cover and you don't want to have a person walking it, or if there's a beach that's essentially inaccessible by people. So there have been a handful of lessons that we've learned while we've been doing this, and some of these with some of the responses that we've been on with Oscar, as well as several others, Oscar the drone, that is. And so again, the size of the tar balls by the time we got there were on the edge of a detection, and so for that reason and others, we have put together what we call a deployment and installation guide that allows us to figure out what's going to go on in a particular deployment, whether it's at a fixed site or on a drone, and kind of in a graphical way. This gives us the footprint of the field of view on the ground, and then numerically. So for example, if you have a Pyxis mounted on a sensor or a drone at 30 meters above the ground with a 40 millimeter focal length looking in this direction, then at the top of the field of view, in this blue triangle, this is our limit of resolution in terms of spatial resolution. The distance up there is about 360 meters, and that corresponds to about an 11 square meter area, which at our 50 micron metallic thickness sensitivity, then that corresponds to about a liter of oil, looking out at about 360 meters. And as you get closer, of course, it becomes less and less. And at the bottom of the field of view, at 100 meters at this point, we're looking at basically less than a 20th of a liter. But what this allows us to do it's an Excel spreadsheet, obviously, and we can play with the numbers here and try to assess where we need to fly or where we need to locate a mast for a fixed site deployment. Another thing that we've learned, and Christian's going to be talking about a deployment of the Oscar system to their McKittrick facility a little bit later this afternoon, I think. And one of the lessons that we learned there is looking at, we have to be wary of thermal shadows. And basically what this means is that we have to be careful about the flight path that we choose. If you're doing a flyby that looks something like this, then the the spill or the area in question can be, you can find it in thermal shadow, which is shown represented here by this hull, or by the boat in the background. So in planning your flight, this is what you don't want to do. If you aren't sure exactly what you're looking for, then an orbit would allow you to get a good perspective. You may lose it again, as you saw in the thermal shadow here, but clearly there are areas where you would get a nice view without this thermal shadow. And then ultimately what you'd want to do, ultimately what you'd want to do is you'd want to do a flyover that looks something like that. So again, this it's just kind of a lesson learned, and an example of where you'd want to work on your ConOps a little bit, or just plan ahead a little bit. And then another thing that we learned in the Delaware deployment was that just like infrared, the polarized infrared doesn't do very well in fog, and it turns out they had fog for a couple of days there in Delaware. So some of the lessons learned. Where we're going, we are working with American Aerospace on a new gimbal, what we're calling Oscar Gen 3, with a reduced size, weight, and power. It'll be plug and play with a variety of platforms. We're adding a zoom lens so that you'll be able to change that footprint on the ground rather than having a fixed focal length, fixed field of view that we have currently. And American Aerospace has georeferencing and mapping software. We're going to integrate that with their software for real-time video and real-time situational awareness and feedback. And the gimbal will be compatible with a variety of platforms, including the American Aerospace Air Ranger, which is a Group 3 kind of long endurance, long range, beyond visual line of sight platform that they're rolling out. And then finally, we are taking the camera, and for fixed site application, we're developing, nearing the end of the development of our pods, the Polaris oil detection system, where we are taking advantage of the pretty robust signatures of the polarization for continuous monitoring and autonomous monitoring at that. So it senses recoverable oil, and we can, of course, define what the detection zones are if you're looking at a retention pond or some other kind of facility on shore where you might have false alarms or don't care. It can track the oil movement. We can estimate the size and direction and that kind of thing. And it is scalable to a number of sensors. So if you needed to deploy these around a facility, and we do have an explosion-proof housing. So we're actually deploying one a little bit later this year offshore to a transfer station. So that's add on this thermal polarization, and it shows that it's pretty robust in a wide variety of conditions and situations where you are sometimes seeing false positives or false alarms. Different applications at all points during the taking IRA's 10 million foot view. I think we can cover 3/4 of his circle of prevention, preparedness, response, and so on. And then, of course, the pods plays a role in that. And really, we're looking for opportunities to test, to do further testing and deploy it for spill responses. So we'd welcome feedback or a heads up about any events that are ongoing. And so with that, I think I am done.
Okay, well, thank you, David. You certainly have a camera there with unique capabilities. I'm wondering, the new gimbal that you're designing, will that be DJI compatible? Because you know that we are here in California at Fish and Wildlife. We are still a DJI shop, and we're pretty much limited to the Zenmuse FLIR. What do you think about partnering with DJI? Although that may be pretty risky because I know the feds can't use them, And I don't know how long it'll be until we get that word, but for now we are DJI shop.
Yeah, so the current system, actually, the current Oscar system that American Aerospace is deploying and actually working with Chevron and Christian's group on is a DJI M600. So I think by default, yes, we are compatible with DJI.
Okay, good to hear.